Hi, welcome back. We're going to be reading Tangerine today, and we are picking up on the bottom of page 270, where it says Sunday, December 3rd. Let's begin. Sunday, December 3rd. I was up before dawn today waiting for the news. The bad news. I was standing on the sidewalk when a white van with squeaky brakes drove up. A thin arm reached out of the passenger's side window and tossed the Sunday edition of the Tangerine Times onto the driveway. It was oversized and heavy and double wrapped in a plastic bag. The same thing was happening all over Lake Windsor Downs. The same thing was happening all over other developments. The white vans were pulling up, and these fat plastic bags were flying out the windows, bursting like water balloons in the homes of the football fans of Lake Windsor High School. It sure was a mess. Our phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Dad answered it upstairs and heard the bad news from another football father. I don't even know which one. I was already down in the great room reading all about it. The story filled the bottom right-hand corner of the front page. It took up 2 columns there and was continued on page 10. The headline said, quote, Lake Windsor athlete confesses in football scandal, unquote. There was a photo of Antoine Thomas leaving the Tangerine County Municipal Building with the caption, Star quarterback Antoine Thomas leaves emergency meeting of the Tangerine County Sports Commission. The front page was just the tip of the iceberg. The article continued inside, with photos, charts, and quotations spread across all of pages 10 and 11. There were photos of Antoine, Coach Warner, and the 3 members of the Tangerine County Sports Commission. There was a chart showing the territorial boundaries of Lake Windsor High School and Tangerine High School, and another chart showing the Lake Windsor football records before and after the arrival of Antoine Thomas. The quotes were from Coach Warner and Mr. Bridges. They were both, quote, shocked by the news. Neither admitted to knowing anything about anything. The article itself began, quote, the Tangerine County Sports Commission meeting in emergency session last night voted to nullify all victories by the Lake Windsor High School football team over the last 3 seasons. This drastic action was taken in response to a confession made by Lake Windsor quarterback Antoine Thomas to the commission members. In a signed statement, Thomas confessed to lying about his eligibility to attend Lake Windsor High School. The article quoted a commission member as saying that Antoine, quote, had contacted them, had met with them, and had presented them with a notarized statement. The same member said they, quote, had no choice but to uphold the regulations of the commission and to nullify all the victories in which Mr. Thomas was involved. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I had thought that maybe Lake Windsor would get fined, or they would have to forfeit their last victory against Tangerine High, but not this. I never even suspected that the commission had such power. It was like they were rewriting history. Lake Windsor had had a 7-3 record in Antoine's first season. They were 9-1 in his next season and 10-0 this season. That's a total of 26 wins and 4 losses. Now they're 0-30, 0 wins and 30 losses over the last 3 seasons. And, if that's not bizarre enough, every record that they set with Antoine on the team has been nullified too. There was a boxed list of those. Most of the records belonged to Antoine Thomas, but Eric Fisher was in there for the longest field goal, the highest field goal percentage in a season, and the most extra points in a season. Not anymore. They're all nullified. There was another article that focused on a guy who lives in Tangerine on the same street as Antoine Thomas. He's a black guy, about 25 years old, who had played football at Tangerine High and then at Florida A&M. This is part of what he said. Quote, everyone knows how it is. If you want that big-time football dream, that Heisman Trophy thing, you get out of Tangerine. No big-time scouts ever come here, ever. So you get yourself an address in Lake Windsor. You have your mail sent there, but you continue to live here, and you live a lie. Everybody knows what's happening. Nobody asks any questions. But now Antoine is the one standing up saying that it's all a lie, so people have to listen. I had finished reading all of the articles in the front section by the time Dad walked into the great room. He still had the phone in his hand, and he had forgotten to turn it off. I could tell by his face that he had already been told the basic facts. I handed over the front section without comment and looked to see what there was in the sports section. Dad sat down in a heap on the floor. He finally turned off the phone, and he started to read. But the phone rang again immediately. He listened impatiently, then said, I have no idea. I haven't even had a chance to read the paper yet. He hung up again and held the paper in front of him with both hands like he was grabbing some guy by the lapels. I left him alone and examined the front page of the sports section. The left side had a column written by Mr. Donnelly with the strange title, Thoughts on an Imaginary Porcelain Plate. I almost didn't read it, thinking he had written the column before all of this Antoine Thomas stuff had happened, but I was wrong. Here is the entire column. Not too many people know this. For 20 years, I held the Tangerine County record for the most passing yards in a single game. How I got that record had as much to do with the weather conditions as it did with my talent as a quarterback, but I didn't care. The record was mine, and I was proud of it. On the night I set the record, Tangerine High was playing Sewanee High during a violent thunderstorm. By all rights, the game should have been called off, but no one in authority had enough sense to do that. As the lightning flashed and the thunder crackled, I, the unsung quarterback of an unsung team, rose up out of that mud, not once, but twice, to achieve football immortality. Twice we were pinned on our own 5-yard line, and twice I dropped back, slipping and sliding, and heaved the ball. Twice, a receiver ran under the heave and kept on running, 95 yards into the end zone. In 2 plays, I had passed for 190 yards. In the rest of the game, I would pass for only 37 more, but the damage had been done. The old record had been shattered. The new record was mine. It went in the record book this way. Most passing yards in a single game, 227. William F. Donnelly, Tangerine High. I have actually seen this record book at meetings of the Tangerine County Sports Commission. It's an old red book. And yes, I have looked up my name. That name, written by hand in a fat old book, is it. It's all you get. There is no trophy, no plaque, no certificate, no plate. You get that one handwritten line plus the knowledge inside of you that you hold the record. Well, that wasn't enough for me. I needed something more splendid, something that I could picture in my mind. So whenever I thought about the record, which was often, I imagined a fine porcelain plate. It was a large white plate encircled with 14-karat gold edging, a plate that you would display proudly on the back wall of a trophy case, a plate that gleamed at visitors and invited comments. But it was also a fragile plate, one that would last only until fate smiled on some other quarterback rising up out of some other mud puddle. Miraculously, my plate hung intact for 20 years. When it was broken, when my record finally fell, it had nothing to do with a lucky heave or a slippery surface. Antoine Thomas of Lake Windsor High School broke my record midway through his sophomore year. He broke it on a sunny Saturday up at Lake Windsor High, playing against my old school. In that game, he threw for 250 yards and 5 touchdowns. But that was just the beginning. Antoine Thomas would break my record 6 more times. Actually, after the first time, he was breaking his own records. He would go on to rewrite that old red record book in dozens of single game, single season, and career categories, becoming the most dominant player of his or any other generation. Now all that has changed. The Tangerine County Sports Commission has ruled that Antoine Thomas was not legally eligible to play for the Lake Windsor High School. Therefore, the record that he broke were not legally broken. Do you realize what this means? The Tangerine County Sports Commission has gathered up the shards of my porcelain plate, crazy glued them together, and handed it back to me. I'm looking at it right now. I guess they meant well, but they did a lousy job. I can see the cracks, like the lines of age on a face. I can see the globs of glue, like tears that will not fall. I can see chips and missing flakes in the gold edging where the circle has been broken. Thanks, Tangerine County Sports Commission, but no thanks. I'm not putting this thing back in my trophy case. I wouldn't even put this thing out in a garage sale. This is nothing to be proud of. Antoine Thomas holds the record for the most passing yards in a single game. Antoine Thomas is the greatest quarterback in the history of Tangerine County. Everybody knows that. I was glad that Mr. Donnelly had put in one good word for Antoine, because it was clear that no one else was going to. The phone kept ringing. A strategy was emerging from the calls that Dad received and made. They were going to blame Antoine, and Antoine alone. The families, the coaches, the teachers, the fans were all denying that they even dimly suspected that anyone was breaking any rule at any time. Give me a break. After I heard Dad telling an assistant coach that he too was shocked by the news, I couldn't take it anymore. I said, Dad, have you ever seen any of the Lake Windsor High School football guys out running? He looked as if he was surprised that I was there. What? Have you ever seen any of the Lake Windsor High football guys out running, like along the roads? Yeah, sure. Why? Have you ever seen them riding 10 speeds or shooting hoops or playing tennis? Yeah. Have you ever seen them driving their cars? Yes. Okay. Now, have you ever seen Antoine Thomas doing any of those things? Have you ever seen Antoine out running or biking or driving anywhere around here? Dad looked at me curiously, but he still didn't get it. He answered, No, I can't say I have. Have you seen him at the supermarket or at a pump at the gas station or getting some fries at McD's? Dad was nodding his head now, but he wasn't agreeing with me. He was getting annoyed. What's this about? I guess it's about your eyesight, Dad. Your eyesight and Coach Warner's and Mr. Bridges's and everybody else's who's shocked today because I've seen lots of those Lake Windsor guys in lots of places. Everywhere we go, in fact. But I have never seen Antoine Thomas. I've never seen him anywhere except at the football stadium. And that's because he doesn't live around here, Dad. He lives in Tangerine, and everybody knows that. Dad looked down. He knew that I was right. He knew the truth. The phone rang again, but he didn't answer it. Sunday, December 23rd. Later. With everything else fighting for room in my head, I must confess that Mom and Dad's, quote, important meeting didn't seem very important to me, and that's why it took me by surprise. As I came downstairs, I heard Mom's voice, tense and upset. I want this thing to be over with, completely finished, everyone gone by the time my parents get here. Dad was just as intense. What? And you think I don't? I don't want them butting in on this. They were setting up the great room, setting it up as if for a homeowners meeting. They had arranged 10 chairs facing the fireplace for the guests and another 10 chairs off to the side by the kitchen. These chairs, as it turned out, were for the families. 2 families, the Fishers and the Bowers. As the guests arrived, they were handed sheets of paper by Dad. I took one for myself and read it. It was a list of items that had been stolen from the houses in Lake Windsor Downs, as compiled by the Tangerine County Sheriff's Department. There were notations like Rolex watch, $900, recovered, and pearls, antique, $500, not recovered. By 1 o'clock, all of the guests had been seated. I knew who most of them were. They were from Joey's Street, the street where all of the houses had been tented. That's what they all had in common. The white Tudor, the gray Lancaster, the yellow Stuart. Today, they were all the same. Today, they were all the blue tents. The chairs off to the side were occupied by Mom, Dad, Arthur Bauer Sr., Mrs. Bauer, who I had never seen before, and Paige Bauer. Arthur Bauer Sr. looked angry. The rest of them looked sick at heart. Arthur Bauer Jr. had joined Eric out on the patio, where the two of them were slouching silently. Mom and Dad had set out a pair of chairs for them next to their families, but they weren't sitting in them. I wasn't sitting in my family chair either. I chose a place on the couch, next to the coffee table. Mom stood up to open the meeting, but before she spoke, she turned and looked out at Eric. Then she walked into the kitchen, opened the patio door, and said in a trembling voice, Eric, would you come in here, please? Neither Eric nor Arthur moved. Mom waited them out in front of everyone. Silence filled the great room like an embarrassing smell. Finally, Mom repeated, Eric, would you come in here, please? Arthur Bauer Sr. leaned around the corner and barked, Arthur, get in here. First Arthur, then Eric, staggered to their feet and moved slowly inside to the empty chairs next to their families. When they sat down, there was a low gasp as the guests looked upon their horrible faces. Eric's nose was blood red and swollen. His eyes were mere slits and rimmed with black, like a raccoon's. Believe it or not, Arthur looked worse. Arthur's face was covered with purple bumps and red cuts. His lips were cracked and swollen, too. He looked out of place among humans, like an ogre in a storybook. Mom picked up her notebook, opened it, and started to speak in an even, formal voice. On behalf of the Bauer family and the Fisher family, I want to thank you for coming. It is my duty to inform all of you of the following. She looked down at her notes and read. On November 22nd, I made a shocking discovery. While out at our storage bin searching for boxes of winter clothing, I found a gym bag that did not belong there. When I opened this gym bag, I found a U.S. Army gas mask, a pair of rubber gloves, and a plastic supermarket bag filled with diamond earrings, watches, gold rings, and many other types of precious jewelry. This time, there was a loud gasp from the audience, including me. That afternoon, I spoke with Sergeant Edwards of the Tangerine County Sheriff's Department. You probably know his name. Sergeant Edwards confirmed that the items in the gym bag matched the descriptions of the items that were stolen from your homes while they were tented. Mom closed the notebook and made eye contact with the guests. It didn't take a genius to figure out the rest. These items were stolen by Eric Fisher and Arthur Bauer. They have admitted as much. They have had no choice but to admit it. Arthur used the gas masks to enter the tented homes. Then he stole items from those homes while Eric kept watch outside. She pulled out a copy of the sheet that each guest had been given. We have recovered some of the items already. My husband will tell you more about that. Eric and Arthur gave some of your things away, and we are working on getting them back. Mom nodded at Paige. Paige Bauer has already returned the items that were given to her. Her friend, Tina Turreton, who agreed to come here today, but who obviously has not shown up, has already returned what was given to her. They have also provided us with names of other Lake Windsor High School students who received stolen items from Eric and Arthur. We have contacted the parents of all of those students and are confident that we will be able to get back those stolen items. Mom stared blankly at the guests for a minute, then said, My husband has more to say to you. Dad stood up as Mom sat down. He picked up where she had left off. That's right. Sergeant Edwards is the Tangerine County officer in charge of all of your cases. He has allowed us, and by us, I mean the Fishers and the Bowers, to approach all of you with a plan to make restitution. That is, Eric and Arthur will make full restitution to all of you for all of your stolen property. If any item cannot be recovered and returned, Mr. Bauer and I will guarantee its full value to you in cash. Dad held up his copy of the list of stolen items. You can see what we have already recovered. Those items could be released to you as early as tomorrow. If we can get all of you to agree to this restitution plan, and it has to be a unanimous agreement, then the Sheriff's Department will no longer pursue further charges against Eric and Arthur. I felt sorry for Dad at that moment. He just couldn't give it up. He had too much invested in the Eric Fisher football dream, and he just couldn't give up. I wanted to say, look at Eric's face, Dad. That is what he really looks like. But I kept quiet. The phone rang, so I leaned over the coffee table and grabbed the portable. It was Joey, and he was practically screaming into the receiver. The sheriff's deputies are at Arthur Bauer's house. They're sitting in a car out front. Oh, yeah? Yeah, they stopped me on my bike. They asked me if I knew where he was. I know where he is. Yeah, where? He's right here. Whoa, can I tell them? Yeah, why not? Joey slammed down the phone. Arthur Bauer Sr. was speaking now. He was angry. I've talked to my son about this. He has admitted his wrongdoing. He has said he is sorry, and he has made full disclosure of the facts. The question today is, do you want to prosecute these two dumb kids and possibly ruin their lives, or do you want them to make full restitution to you like men and get on with their lives? Do you want to give them a second chance or not? I searched the faces of the people from the blue tents. Their jaws were set. Their eyes were focused on the ugly faces of Eric and Arthur. The blue tents clearly felt no pity for those two thieves sitting in their chairs, staring at the floor, voiceless, useless, lifeless, like a pair of mannequins in a dumpster. One man spoke up against Mr. Bauer. He said, "Don't go blaming me for ruining your kid's life. I didn't ask your kid to break into my house." Mr. Bauer answered coldly, "No, of course you didn't." The man turned to the others and continued, "Why should they escape all punishment for their crimes? That is not justice. What if the cops had nabbed two kids from Tangerine for robbing our houses? They'd be in jail right now." Mr. Bauer waved this at him. "Yeah, and you'd never see your property again. If this gets into the court system, you might never get your things back." The man shouted, "What is this, blackmail? If I don't agree, I don't get my stuff back?" He looked at the others. "We're getting robbed all over again." Mr. Bauer was furious, but controlled. Yeah, well, maybe you're the one person in the world who never did anything wrong in his life. Maybe you were born perfect. Maybe you were never a dumb kid once. The man didn't back down. I'll tell you what I never did. I never broke into an old lady's bedroom and ransacked through her underwear drawer and stole her pearl necklace that was handed down to her by her own grandmother and then gave it to my girlfriend like I was a big man or something. I never did that. And I don't know about anybody else who did either. Your kid and that other kid are in a class all by themselves. Mr. Bauer didn't reply. He was so angry that he walked back to his seat and sat down, leaving no speaker at all in front of the meeting. Dad got up again, looked at them all, and asked simply, "Do you accept our plan for making restitution or not?" What choice did they have? In the end, the blue tent people accepted the plan reluctantly. They agreed, reluctantly, to give Eric and Arthur that second chance. The second chance you get when your parents can guarantee full restitution. The second chance you get when you can kick a 50-yard field goal. The meeting broke up quickly. Mr. Bauer led his family directly to the door. The other guests started to file out, solemnly, silently, but then they stopped in their tracks. Something was blocking their passage. I hurried over to the side window and looked out. The first thing I saw was Joey. He was straddling his bike on the sidewalk. He was squinting in the sun. I looked to his left, and there they were. Two sheriff's deputies, one thin with blonde hair, the other big and muscular with a black mustache. Joey pointed out Arthur Bauer, and the two deputies started towards him. Arthur and his father stopped still, right in front of my window, while the rest of the guests and the families squeezed out onto the driveway. The big deputy asked, "Are you Arthur Bauer?" Arthur nodded meekly. The deputy said, "Extend both hands, please, Mr. Bauer." Arthur did, and the deputy calmly clicked a pair of handcuffs onto his wrists. His partner circled Arthur and started to pat him down, looking for a weapon. I hurried to the door and pushed my way through. The big deputy was reading Arthur his rights. "Arthur Bauer, you are under arrest in connection with the murder of Louise Cruz. You have the right to remain silent." Arthur's father was paralyzed, in a state of shock. But when he heard the charge, he yelled out, "Wait a minute! Arthur, is that the guy you told me about? The guy at football practice?" Arthur, terrified, nodded his head rapidly. His father continued, "Listen, officer, this is not right. This is a mistake. Arthur told me all about that guy back when this first happened." The deputy, whose name tag said Sergeant Rojas, started walking with his prisoner, not listening. "Arthur told me about a guy who showed up at the football practice looking for a fight. He didn't belong up there. He was just looking for trouble. Am I right, Arthur?" Arthur continued to nod. "He came up to Arthur and took a swing at him, so Arthur hit him back one time. Am I right?" Arthur nodded. "And that was the end of it. The guy came up there looking for a fight, and he found one. The guy didn't even belong up there." I couldn't listen to any more of this. I shouted, "He belonged up there!" Arthur's father turned to see who had said this. I went on, "He belonged up there as much as you and your stupid kid do." I looked at the blonde deputy. The weapon that he used to kill Louise Cruz was a blackjack. This made Sergeant Rojas stop in front of the open door of his police cruiser. He turned and stared at me. So I added, "It's probably still in his Land Cruiser back at his house. It was there on Friday night anyway." Sergeant Rojas called over, "How do you know he used a blackjack?" "I saw him do it. I saw Arthur Bauer sneak up on Louise Cruz like a coward and hit him on the side of the head. Louise never even saw it coming." Sergeant Rojas told the blonde guy, "Get over there and guard that vehicle until I get back." The blonde deputy took off running. Sergeant Rojas turned back to me. "What else did you see?" I stood up straight and faced them all, like I had seen Louise do. I heard Eric Fisher tell him to do it." The heads in the crowd all turned toward Eric. Sergeant Rojas pointed one finger at him and ordered, "You, get over here." Eric shuffled forward like he was already wearing leg irons. The sergeant demanded, "Is that true?" Eric looked at Dad. Dad repeated the words. "Is that true?" Eric hesitated for just a moment, then started to nod. At Dad, at the sergeant, at everyone in the crowd. Steadily up and down, he nodded to us all. Sergeant Rojas instructed Dad, "You keep this young man in the house. Not in the neighborhood, not in the yard. In the house. I may call or come back at any time, and I expect him to be here." Dad whispered that he understood. The sergeant turned his attention back to me. "Do we have your statement, son?" No, sir." Then I felt compelled to add, I wasn't brave enough to give my statement. He eyeballed me. Are you willing to give a statement now if called upon? Yes, sir. He put one hand on Arthur's head and pushed him down into the seat in the back of the cruiser. The rest of the Bowers hurried into their car to follow. I stood there with Joey and watched them pull away. The people from the meeting drifted off toward their homes, shaking their heads and talking. Joey held out his fist, and I banged my fist down onto it. He said, I'm going to hustle over to Bowers to see what the deputy does. Okay. I'll talk to you later. Once Joey rode away, we found ourselves alone. Mom, Dad, Eric, and me. We walked together back up the driveway and into the garage. Eric stopped by the door, turned, and looked at me through his swollen eyes. I looked back through my thick lenses. He seemed to be struggling with something. Maybe a memory. Maybe he was reliving a scene from long ago. The four of us remained poised there, like we were frozen in time. 4 frozen figures from the Wonders of the World exhibit. Mom finally broke our spell when she whispered to herself, Oh no, not now. We all turned to see Grandmom and Grandpop walking up the driveway. Mom whispered, What are we going to tell them? I knew the answer to that. We're going to tell them something bad, Mom. Grandmom and Grandpop stopped at the top of the incline, framed in the rectangular opening. Grandmom said, Caroline, have we come at a bad time? Mom shook her head. No, you're right on time. You're here right when you said you'd be. Grandpop looked hard at Eric. He asked him, What the hell happened to your eyes? Eric answered him in a surprisingly strong voice. I got kicked in the face, Grandpop. Some kid kicked me in the face. Grandpop glanced over at me, and then back at Eric. He gave him a short nod, like he understood. Eric said, Excuse me. Then he opened the door and disappeared inside. Dad gestured to Grandmom and Grandpop to come in, too. They exchanged a worried look and then started forward. Mom and Dad led us into the kitchen and sat at the round table. Grandmom and Grandpop looked me up and down. Then Grandma asked her usual question. How are you, Paul? All right, I'm all right. Grandpop clapped me on the shoulder. That's good. I dragged over a stool from the counter so the 5 of us could sit around the table. Eric wasn't anywhere to be seen. I figured he'd gone upstairs to his room. Mom and Dad took turns talking, just as they had at the meeting. Grandmom and Grandpop didn't seem surprised by any of what they heard. They took it all in without even blinking. When it was over, when we had told them every bad thing there was to tell, we paused and waited. Grandmom put her hand over her heart, sighed deeply, and said, You know what I'm going to tell you, Caroline. Mom closed her eyes. You're paying now for what you didn't do back then. Mom agreed with her completely. I know. But Dad wasn't so quick to surrender. He said curtly, That's easy to say now. It's easy enough, 7 years after the fact, to say I told you so. Grandmom replied flatly, We're not saying that. Grandpop leveled a stare at him. We did tell you so. Eric did need help. He needed a doctor's help. Dad countered with, No, Eric did not need a doctor's help. He did not need drugs. He did not need to be one of those medicated kids who float around all the time like they're underwater. What drugs? We're not talking about drugs. The kid needed to know which end was up, that's all. First off, he needed to get his backside whipped for hurting Paul. Dad looked away. He clearly wanted out of this conversation. I guess we all did, because we all sat for a long minute in silence. Grandpop finally said, Okay, let me be the one to apologize. I don't have all the answers. I'm not saying I do, he said to Mom. We're a family, that's all I know. We'll help you any way we can, he said to Grandmom. I think the best thing we can do right now is get down to Orlando and leave them alone. Mom tried half-heartedly to talk them out of it. Dad didn't say a word. He drifted off toward the guest room, toward the great room. Mom said, At least take a tour of the house. That's what you came here for. Grandmom and Grandpop exchanged another look. Grandmom said, A quick tour. I tagged along behind them on a fast lap around the ground floor. We passed by Dad sitting in his alcove in front of the IBM. I watched him as Mom pointed out things in the great room. He was sitting in a trance-like state in front of the screen with the green list of Eric scholarship offers file washing over his face. Mom described the top floor briefly, but she didn't take them up there. The tour ended in the foyer at the front door. Grandmom said, "It's a lovely house," and stepped outside. Grandpop, however, was not quite finished. He signaled, "Just a minute," climbed the stairs, and turned left. He knocked, waited a moment, and then spoke quietly to Eric through the door. Then he came back down to Mom. He told her, "It's a beautiful house, all right. Nothing like those places I made you live in, huh?" Mom started to cry. Mom looked like she might cry. Grandpa put an arm around her shoulder. "Good luck to you in it, honey. Good luck to you from here on." Then he hurried out to catch up with Grandmom. Mom watched them drive away down the street until the ringing phone pulled her back inside. She picked it up, listened briefly, and answered, "We'll be here. We'll be there." Her eyes drifted over to mine. She spoke in a weary voice, a voice beyond anger, beyond upset. "That was your principal, Dr. Johnson. She wants to see both of us in her office tomorrow morning at 7:30 sharp."